Everybody, welcome to the Wednesday edition of the Dobbin Bandits. I'm Orrin Phillips, and I'm so glad to have you guys with us today because we have a round table today. We are talking with Jim Beard, Ed Catto, and the great Paul Kupperberg. Talk about Jim's new book. It is called Jack of All Comics, a fan conversation about the king of comics, and this is an amazing book. Guys, go to Amazon and go check it out. It is a bunch of essays about Jack Kirby's different works through the years from a variety of writers, Paul, Ed, Jim has mentioned, and many others. It's a book that, it gives you a different perspective of what Jack Kirby did and meant to the different books he worked on. And it also starts a conversation with your friends and others who read the book and are Jack Kirby fans as well. And that's something we get into here. So, without further ado, here is our Jack Kirby Roundtable. Today, we have Mr. Jim Beard, Mr. Paul Kupperberg, and of course, Ed Catto. And we're here to talk about Jack of All Comics, the hot new book out now. Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time this evening.
Hey, thanks for having us here.
So I'll start with Jim, will go around, but how did each of you discover Jack Kirby?
Oh, I discovered him. It's all explained in the book, but the nutshell is that I discovered Jack through reprints.
Mhm.
I'm a child of the early 70s, so I grew up in a time, of hot reprints.
Mhm.
And I saw a lot of Fantastic Four in the pages of, like giant size Fantastic Four or in those wonderful Treasury editions, and saw a lot of him. I didn't see my very first at that time, new Jack Kirby work until the Manhunter issue of First Issue Special.
Oh, wow.
As I explain in the book when I do my essay about First Issue Special, and then all bets were off, and I could put a name to that art, and it was smooth sailing from there.
Ed?
Yeah, I I was a little bit older than Jim, and I was like the tail end of those Marvel Silver Age books. And I remember like I was probably reading Fantastic Four when he was gone, but there were a lot of reprints, and we kind of knew, what he was all about. Well, wait a second. It has to be, again, I'm getting my timing, but I do remember the thing I remember is when they had the ads where he was moving to DC, which was a big deal. My dad, who was always very supportive with comics, and he kind of, he read just enough to keep up. And it was like the great one is coming, and
Mhm.
Kirby's, and we had this conversation like the way you would about like a ball player leaving one ball club or something.
Hmm.
And I vividly remember that, like, oh my goodness gracious, like how's this gonna work? How's the world gonna keep spinning, with the thing going on? And it was a big deal. So I guess I was right at the tail end of his, Thor FF stuff, and then picked it up with, DC and first issue special and all that.
And Paul?
Well, I'm older than all of yous,
Put
but
together.
I put together, yeah. But I started reading comics around, looking at them, reading them in 59, 60.
Mhm.
By the time the Marvel stuff came around, I was, pretty well steeped into comics. And as far as I can tell, he was always just there.
Mhm.
I mean, he was just part of the landscape. I was mainly a DC kid, so I was more interested in Carmine Infantino and Kurt Swan than I was Jack Kirby. But I was certainly aware of him and Ditko and Don Heck and all those other guys.
And Jim, what was step one in getting this project off the ground?
Setting the parameters of it, of what I wanted to accomplish with it. I wanted it to just be one big conversation, about Jack and his work. But I knew I had to rein it in a little bit, and it kind of fell into place pretty easily. I started counting series that he was involved in. I knew I wanted to start with Fantastic Four in 1961, and I wanted to end up with his his first ending with DC. Or pardon me, with or first ending with DC, and then second go round with Marvel. So to take it up, to about 78, and I started counting, and it came out to be, at that point, it was literally, I defined 25 different essays. When all said and done, it turned out to be 28 essays. Some guy named Kupperberg had to add his own idea in and insist on doing his own little thing instead of what I had put in
You,
my
you
parameters.
you can't
But
ignore
it's
the
much
black and
better for
whites.
that. I hadn't included the two black and white magazines that Jack did for DC Spirit World and in the Days of the Mob, and I said, yeah, I mean, we got to have those in there. And towards the end of the writing, I decided I needed to have Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos in there. I'm not sure exactly why I skipped over that in the beginning. And then we kind of also combined a couple things. There's only one essay for his work on Cobra. Um, uh, uh, there's one issue of Richard Dragon, Kung Fu Fighter, and oh, his couple issues of Justice Incorporated. We made that all, one essay. But it was really those parameters. So it's literally it's Marvel 1.0, well, yeah, literally Marvel 1.0, DC 1.0, and then Marvel 2.0, to kind of complete that circle. And then from there it was literally starting to plug writers into essays, and it kind of came together, pretty smoothly.
Paul, I want to ask your professional opinion about it's sort of a
And you're
two-pronged.
ugly too. No, I'm sorry. That's another joke. Go ahead.
And
You're
you'll never play the piano.
uh, Jack Kirby's strengths and weaknesses, A, as a writer, and then B, as an artist, in your professional opinion.
Hmm.
Well, his strength as a writer per se, I don't think he had many strengths.
Okay.
As an idea man, I thought he was very strong.
Mhm.
His ideas, his concepts were amazing. He went places you just like, where did this little, Jewish guy from the Lower East Side come up with that idea?
Mhm.
Where does Devil Dinosaur come to that? I think again his writing, his characters all sounded the same, and his plotting was sometimes dubious,
Mhm.
but he just the stuff carried by the strength of the ideas themselves,
Mhm.
and the power of the art. I mean, his if he had his strength as an artist was just his ability to tell that story and to make it big and bold and powerful. I mean, a guy just standing there on the corner is, ready to explode. It's just, stuff is just so dynamic. Um, you know, Anatomy, sure, why not? It wasn't the most important thing, but it didn't have to be. Because I defy you, what's the anatomy of the thing anyway?
Was Superpowers the only project you worked on him with?
Yeah, yeah, that was it was just a bit of dumb luck that I got the assignment, and yeah, that was 1980. This was the 86
I believe so.
series, so probably we were doing it in 85 or so. But yeah, it was based on the superpowers action figure line, and there had already been one mini that Jack had plotted and Joey Cavallari wrote, and then I don't know why Jack didn't plot this one, but that was handed to me to do, so I wrote. I got to write it. Um, as I've said, I didn't know Jack was going to be the artist when I started it. That was still up in the air, so I was just writing scripts, for uh, uh, you know an artist, hoping it would be somebody good. And it was.
And Ed, why do you think Kirby is as relevant today as he was when he was, doing these books? Why does he have such an impact on the comic community as when he was, out there producing stuff?
Oh, I think
Yeah.
it's because I think it's because his work so helped define the visual, vernacular of comics
Mhm.
that it still resonates. People are still, whether they know it or not, they're still influenced by what he brought to the table over those however many years, 40, 50 years that he was doing it.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I think also there's an element of, like a little bit like Adam West Batman, Jim, like you loved it and then you fell out of love and then you fall back in love. Like I remember as a kid, like to answer that question, like when he took over Captain America and Black Panther, and like I was reading, Englehart and McGregor, and those books seemed, so silly compared to what we had. Like there was a more, adulty, book quotes around that. And there was like a bit of a disappointment, as a fan, like, oh man, like what is this? Like, it's not, working for me. And then, but now as I'm older, like I love those books. I love the double page spreads. I love the pacing and the urgency, and also I'm a little pleasantly surprised with like Jack Kirby collector up to 100 issues, and like I have a shelf full of just Kirby books. We've all read a lot and we've talked a lot about Kirby, but I still want to talk about him more and read more about him and learn more. Like all these essays were fantastic in this book because everybody had their story, and all the authors are so very very well informed, but it's a little different way of thinking about it, so there is relevance for like creativity or the underdog or the entrepreneur or the family man who feels beleaguered by the world, like all those things. I think we see it, Jack as now, and the veteran. We have great respect. We collectively have great respect for that guy who's, you know, basically showing up for work every day and
Mhm.
doing a damn fine job, like better than anybody else, doing a damn fine job at his job, to pay the bills and, keep the health care. So,
Yeah.
that's I think that's for me as an older guy, that's why I get more that's why he's so relevant to me.
Mhm.
Less so about, oh, Big Barda in panel 4 looks pretty, and
Right.
more so like, man, that son of a gun, God bless him. Like just God bless him.
Jim, what reading these essays and putting this book together, was there anything that you learned or opinion that you had that maybe changed by reading other people's thoughts and opinions on Kirby's work?
Not necessarily, but Ed kind of hit upon something there about there's been a lot of books and a lot of talk about Jack.
Mhm.
But what I was trying to do was say, okay, but we haven't heard from this guy yet, and we haven't heard from this guy yet, and we haven't heard from this guy yet. I wanted it to be a lot of personal stories. And I mean, I think if anything was surprising, it was how many different inroads there were to Jack and his work, and how many different ways of looking at it. Some of the stories are very personal or personable. And then other essays, focus a little bit more on the work itself rather than how they, first saw it. But everybody was allowed to just, use their own opinions and in the way that they looked at it. But yeah, I can't really think of anything that really, shocked me unless somebody just came up with a really great way that they look at it. And there were a few times like that where I went back to the writer and said, "Oh my God, that analogy that you made there. I mean, why didn't I, think of that?" Um, like I think it's Rich Steves does the one about the Eternals, and he talks a lot about how so many things that Jack did before informed the Eternals in a way that I hadn't really thought of it like that before. I mean, obviously, that whole concept of gods who walk the earth kind of as superheroes, that whole idea is something that you see a through line with Jack through his work, but there was some really great insights there. So, if anything surprised me, it was a very personal way that somebody came up with to talk about Jack Kirby. On the back of the book, I say there are a million ways to talk about Jack Kirby, and here is 28, of them. You may have read and heard and whatever stuff about Jack Kirby, but you've never heard these 28 people really dig into these series the way we do in the book.
And just to follow up on that, of the 28, how did that list come up? How did you pick and choose who you wanted to be part of this project?
Yeah, so I knew maybe almost half of the writers that I knew that I wanted them to be involved, and I started going out to people and saying, "Do you want to talk about Jack Kirby in a book?" I think only one person maybe turned me down,
Well, give Stan
and
a
not
break. Come
necessarily
on.
because what?
I said, give Stan a break. Come on.
Oh, don't get me going about that. I would have loved that. One of the highlights of my life is I got to interview Stanley over the phone when I worked for Marvel.com, and that's, I can still hear his voice, in my ear today. But um, I got together a list of everybody that I wanted to be in the book, and then literally said, "Okay, now here's the hard part. Here's the list, and you have to pick three topics and put them in order the way that you would, this is my first choice, second choice, third choice, and I will do my darndest to make sure that you get, at least, the first or second choice." And if I remember correctly, it worked out so well that I don't think I had to go to anybody's third choice. It all, and the people who I knew would pick that particular one, sure enough, they said, "Okay, I want that one." I think there was only one person that was a little disappointed because they didn't get their number one pick, but they got their number two pick. But that came together. I mean, that was the editor's joy right there, that I didn't have to go, "Ooh, I hate to do this to so and so, but I need to have somebody else, write that one." So it all worked out. It all worked out great. And there was a couple of surprises as far as that goes. Like so and so wants that one. Like,
Yeah,
Jim Beard wants to write about first issue special. Is he nuts?
I was surprised with Brevoort and Forever People,
Yeah,
and I thought the essay was brilliant.
yeah.
And I wish like I had done Forever People. Do I like I think I did one that I liked.
I think you got like maybe your first choice. I know Paul got his first and
Yeah, I
only
didn't. I,
choice.
I, I didn't play your little threes
I know,
game
right?
here. I just
Yeah,
went. No, I
yeah,
want to do the black and white magazines. You know
yeah.
what? Those had always intrigued me. They were a kind of a mystery to me. The way they came out, and the fact that there was the DC imprint wasn't on it. Everything else, it was a DC comic. The Indicia had Carmine in it, and Sal Harrison, and the DC's address, but it was this Hampton House distributor, and
Yeah.
I always thought that was some kind of dodge to to like well, it's a new magazine. DC doesn't want to take a chance, so if something goes wrong, well, no, it's this other company publishing. So but I never stopped to think, you know, one of my best friends used to be president and publisher of DC Comics. I could just ask him what he thinks went on. But
Yeah.
I finally did that for this article
Mhm.
and got to, the story behind it. And it wasn't sinister at all. It was just a matter of business. We have, there's this advantage to doing it this way, and that's why they probably did it. The thing that did surprise me, that I always kind of suspected, but researching it, was the fact that once DC got Jack there,
Mm.
I don't think they cared what he did, just as long as he was no longer working for Marvel. Um, you know,
Oh.
because the way they handled him, it seemed there were promises going in that never got fulfilled. Like, with the magazines, he didn't want to write and draw them all. He
Mm.
wanted to be the editor and get other people to get legitimate, literature writers to write articles and pieces for this and have other artists draw it. And I also heard along the way that at some point he didn't want to draw the whole Fourth World Saga. He was just going to get it started and then hand it off to other people to do. But DC was never going to let him do that because, they weren't going to give him that much editorial power. Um, so, it kind of but the black and white magazines, the fact that they were just willing to launch them and then without any chance of ever having a sales report of any kind, just cancel the whole project and dump these copies in a warehouse. So it was just they didn't care that he was there as long as he wasn't at Marvel.
Hmm.
Paul was hoping that it was going to be a really juicy Martin Goodman backroom shenanigans, kind of a thing. No,
Look,
no.
all these guys were sleazy.
Yeah.
The comics the comics industry was built on pornography and condoms,
Mhm.
mail order condoms, and I don't think the mentality has changed much over the last 55 or 90 years. So
Well, Paul, you kind of touched on what I wanted to ask you, which is, we look at Kirby now, we have him sort of on a pedestal. When you started in the industry, what was his reputation and what was the thought process, or how did people view him at the time?
he was, he was a revered and loved figure.
Okay.
I forget what year it was, but there was one year at San Diego convention. I guess it might have been Jack's 60th birthday or whatever. But there was a big party for him, and there was a program book produced and all that with homages to him. I think since his death, and I think since the whole, the Jack got screwed movement took off with such steam that he's gained much more prestige, over the years, and it's deserved. I mean, again, Jack Kirby, good Lord, look at what he did. You know, so I think, but there are a lot of artists like that. Look what's happened to Frank Frazetta. Back when I was, in the '60s, he was a guy who did paperback covers. He did Pellucidar covers.
Mhm.
Now his stuff is selling for millions of dollars. The world has gone mad.
But it's interesting because I've read in some places that when he went back to Marvel after DC, there was some resentment amongst the staff there about him being there and him having some power. And, there was some ill will going on.
I've heard that. Yeah.
Right.
I wasn't around Marvel much and didn't, really hang with those people.
Right.
But I've subsequently heard that people thought it was like, screw you, you can't just waltz back in here.
Right.
Like nothing ever happened. Um, but he's Jack Kirby. He was, other than resent him, what are they gonna do?
Right.
I mean,
Right.
he was who he was. But
Mhm.
yeah, I think that there was a lot of politics around him over the years, even when he was alive. I think he kind of became a centerpiece for a lot of politics, especially when he went after, Marvel and copyrights and all that stuff. So
Mhm.
Yeah, there's been sometimes like Shanus talked to me about a lot about the early days when they were launching Pacific Comics and they had Captain Victory and like they tried a couple other things to start off, but starting with a Jack Kirby comic with comic retailers at that point were in love with him. So they they sold an extraordinary amount, way more than they ever thought they would, just because, and at a higher price, just because like the comic shop owners, who in many ways were the uber fans back then, were so excited for a Jack Kirby comic, which they hadn't seen for a couple of years at that time.
Well, it gave the line legitimacy. Yeah.
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 And yeah, Ed, I was just
In
about
some
to
ways, it's a shame because it's not exactly his best work,
No.
but he's still a living, legend at that point. And,
Listen,
he
yeah,
didn't exactly have the greatest inkers at that point, or, he was kind of repeating concepts and things, but
Yeah.
that's interesting.
yeah,
And,
I think there are, everybody can argue what they think Jack's, his peak years were.
Mhm.
But yeah, not everything is going to be a winner. You throw as much stuff as he threw at the wall,
right.
Right.
it's not all going to be great. It will at least be interesting,
Right.
Yeah.
hopefully, but not going to be great.
Yeah, and the interesting part about that too, it's beyond the purview of your book, Jim, but he made more money on that Captain Victory 1 than he did on any other comic in his whole career,
Wow.
right? And like it's not the best stuff, but
Hmm.
Well,
he was Jack
you
Kirby.
know, even if it wasn't his best stuff, it's nice to hear that the fans supported him enough
Yeah.
that they gave him that,
Yeah,
that they still bought the thing regardless. I mean, I remember when that was coming out, when those books were coming, and it was all kind of like, it was good to see that he was still working, um, you know, um, but hey, again, I guess even like mediocre Kirby is better than no Kirby.
That's
So
what I was been thinking through this whole talk. Like, yeah,
yeah, yeah.
some people would kill to have one of Jack's lesser concepts, or to produce, a silver star, or destroyer
Sure.
duck, or something.
Listen, essentially he drew, Superpowers miniseries.
Mhm.
It's essentially a big old Justice League of America, classic Justice League of America story.
Mhm.
But and again, talk about not great inking.
Mhm.
But it's still this big, powerful story. It's like, Dick Dillon could have drawn it, or Jack Kirby could have drawn it. I'll go with Kirby.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was gonna say because Ed, you mentioned Captain Victory before. Are there any other deep cuts Kirby wise that stand out to you as like his stuff with Tops towards the end, or other projects he did that might be below the fans' radars that you would have recommend people take a look at?
Hmm.
Ooh, well, like what an interesting question. I would almost like I wouldn't tell fans to go chase down Captain Victory or Tops, except for like, understand the bad, like the historical significance is astounding.
Mhm.
But man, I've probably read that book, what, half a dozen times in my life. I couldn't tell you what happened in issue 1 if you put a gun to my head. Like I don't know, he's in space or fights a guy or punches someone. I don't know what he does. But yeah, so I mean, yeah, I don't know. I think the lesser works that I think are very charming
Mhm.
are that for me it's that time at DC after Fourth World kind of comes to a conclusion or whatever happened, and those oddball, dingbats and like all that weird stuff like Manhunter, and even like I remember as a kid there was a demon issue where like the Phantom of the Opera type character takes off his face and
Yeah,
it's grotesque, and I thought my mom was gonna like yell at me for reading that comic because it was so scary. And yeah, I mean like I think that's maybe some of the under the radar stuff that you could look at as a fan or as someone who appreciates art and really.
yeah, I think you can also tag stuff like is the later DC stuff like Commandy and a Demon.
Yeah.
Those. I mean, Commandy is such a rich concept.
Mhm.
But it's insane. It's just like Planet of the Apes time. But it was so insane. You read it. It's like this makes no sense. I don't know where it's possibly going, but we're having fun.
Yeah.
My vote goes to the Jimmy Olsen. That's
Yeah,
still
yeah,
that still is probably, boy, that might be my favorite right there. Definitely of his DC work.
Mhm.
To this day, I love how bonkers it is. I love where it goes and what it does and how it's not like the Jimmy Olsen issues before it and after it. It's just this thing, you know. In many ways, like his Black Panther. It's not like what's before and it's not like what's after. It's Jack. He's just boom right there in the middle.
Yeah.
But Ed, I'm glad you brought up the Demon because that is, I think that's just a standout series, and I think that kind of flies under the radar sometimes. It's not a superhero series, not really. If anything, I guess it's more like the Hulk. It's kind of an anti-superhero thing, but the visceral feeling of that with the kind of medieval stuff that's in
yeah.
present day times and the just the gorgeous designs, everything in that. If I can recommend somebody, I can't easily recommend Jimmy Olsen, everybody. I know people who absolutely hate it,
Yes.
and I just love it so much. If Charles Rutledge hadn't written the Jimmy Olsen essay in the book, I would have definitely done that one myself. And the two issues with Goody Rickles, I should, if I got tattoos, I would get a Goody Rickles, tattoo like right here on my chest. But yeah, if anybody who has not, read those issues of the Demon, look for that, get that, and I think, they'll be kind of eye-opening. I for some reason I just think Jack was just perfect
Mhm.
for that.
I want to go around because it's a topic that Paul's brought up a couple of times, and I want to ask each of you who inked him the best in your opinion.
Mm.
Well,
Who's
I have
starting?
my absolute favorite Kirby inker. He didn't do a lot, and it's really like off to the side, but Bill Everett.
Okay.
Bill
Oh,
Everett inked a bunch of
Oh,
issues of Thor
Okay.
yeah.
that are just fucking awesome.
wow.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine that big, bold Kirby art with that delicate,
Yeah.
Everett line, just filling it in. It's astonishing stuff.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I would usually, Joe Sinnott would be my go-to guy, but I think my all-time favorite is Wally Wood. I think Wood on Kirby is just gorgeous to
Exquisite.
behold.
Yeah.
I I'm gonna go with Mike Royer. Senate is a hard one to kind of look past, but there's something about the that Mike Royer look, but if there was a tie, it would be Wally Wood because Wally comes through so much, but it's still Kirby. You know what I mean? And it's like you have the best of these two worlds going on, and it does, gel well. But Royer just, I don't know, he just brought out the best in Jack. I think,
No
so
Coletta love.
maybe a tie between those.
I
I,
don't get it.
obviously you guys, appreciate the man, and it's obviously comes through in the book. Is it difficult when it's a conversation starts about Jack Kirby, especially on the internet, and it quickly turns into a sniping attack on who did what, who gets credit for what, and we just can't sort of celebrate what he did without it becoming a hot button issue?
Well, as a guy who's inside that world,
Mhm.
the people who are not inside that world don't know shit.
Okay.
They don't know what it's about.
Right.
They don't know what that collaboration was like.
Mhm.
They don't know the circumstances. about the working relationship. You know, yes, Stan was a headline grabber,
Mhm.
but Jack was also a wallflower.
Mhm.
Jack was not suited for the role of spokesperson for Marvel Comics. He
Mhm.
wasn't having it. He was, you know, if you listen to interviews with him, he's a snarly, snappy guy, you know.
Mhm.
He's not selling comic books
Right.
like
Yeah.
Stan was. But you know, I don't cotton to no Stan hating.
Mhm.
Uh, you know, I think it really comes down for me to neither of them were ever as good separately as they were together.
Mm.
And I think that really should tell you everything. You know, the only other collaborator with Stan who came close to doing that kind of work was Ditko. And we all know how much Ditko was actually bringing to the work. So, you know, I think it's just a matter, you know, again, people don't know what was going on. They know what they want to believe. They know what their side tells them to believe, but it's a lot more complicated than that. I mean, remember, these guys did 100 issues of Fantastic Four together. Something must have been working.
And I just wanted to follow up, Paul, just quickly because you just mentioned Ditko as well. To your knowledge, did Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko have any kind of friendship or any kind of relationship, or are they just two very different people who just happen to work at the same place at the same time?
I think it was more likely that. I mean, as far as I know, you know, there's no, you know, no Nixon and China kind of meeting of these two great minds that I've ever heard about. I wouldn't be surprised if their paths had crossed over the years,
Right.
you know, up at Marvel in the 60s. But then again, you know, Steve was gone by what, 66?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Uh,
wasn't there something I forget how the story goes where like Stan or Jack and maybe Ditko or Wood, they were all gonna kind of leave at the same time, and then Jack chickened out, or Jack decided not to go at the. I think there were like there
Hmm.
was a level of frustration, and Jack got anxious and decided to stay a bit longer. Yeah, I
it's
probably shouldn't
possible. I
tell the
mean,
story if I
you
don't
know,
remember.
Yeah.
Jack was the one with a you know with a wife and family.
That's what I was just gonna say. He always
Yeah,
seemed to be the guy who that came first. You know,
yeah,
food on the table, roof over your head, wife, you know, taken care of, kids taken care of,
Mhm.
and Ditko didn't have
yeah.
that. You know, and
Ditko had a you know a very simple. Again, you know, he was not a hermit. He was
Right.
just a private person, you know.
yeah,
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I don't. Yeah, he didn't have what to lose. The same to lose as Jack did, and Wood, you know, Wood would live in a shack in the woods,
Mhm.
uh, you know, shooting squirrels for dinner. No, I don't know about the shooting squirrels part, but you know.
Yeah.
I've heard that. I mean, you know, I know a lot of people who worked with Wood. My brother was his assistant for a while.
Mhm.
You know, which tells you more about Wood than it does Alan. But anyway,
Uh,
it
What?
it was really important to me just to touch upon the Stan thing about the book overall. It was very important to me in the beginning, and I laid that out for everybody who's going to be involved in the book, that we're not going to avoid the controversy, but we're just going to set it aside, you know, for this book. And I made it very clear, you know, there was to be no Stan bashing. And I wasn't gonna, you know, put up with that because I'm both Team Jack and Team Stan. I think I kind of understand, you know, what kind of guys they both were, but other than that, you know, they could say what they wanted, but my book was not going to be the place to hash that out again. There's plenty of other places to go to hash that out, and it's kind of pointless in the first place, you know. Paul pretty much said it. None of us were there.
Right.
You know, we weren't there. We don't know exactly what happened. We hear how many different stories from those people. And yeah, I think I kind of know, what the weaknesses were of both guys,
Mhm.
in terms of how they presented themselves to the world. But yeah, in the end, we can't imagine Jack without Stan for all those years. Just like it's the same with Jack and Joe Simon. In the early days, I can't imagine those two, not as a team. I think it really says something that Jack had those two really collaborative, creative relationships, with two kind of juggernauts. But if you look at it, if I understand this correctly, Joe was the, driving force
Mhm.
of their duo, just like Stan was.
Mhm.
Jack just seemed to work better with, somebody like
Driving the
that.
bus,
But
yeah.
yeah,
What I like so much about this book, Jim, and it's right there on the cover, it's a fan conversation that after you read these essays or while you are reading it, you have a conversation in your own mind about what these opinions are, what people are thinking, how you feel about what they're saying. And I think that's a wonderful thing about this book is that it does not only opens conversations internally, but then you can talk to your friends and say, hey, Paul Kupperberg felt that, blah, 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 blah. And then you
yeah,
start a conversation as well. Was that part of the thing that you wanted to make this book about?
yeah, absolutely. I don't create and publish books in a vacuum. And I've learned over the years there's always going to be, poor reviews or detractors or whatever, but I try to always look at it as part of the conversation.
Mhm.
I want to put stuff out there that spurs on talk and thoughts and ideas. And every one of my anthologies, fiction or nonfiction anthologies, I want as many voices in these things as I can get. And I have just been so damn lucky about the people that I have collaborated with, just like Jack,
Right.
in that way too. And like these two guys right here with me today, they have been with me on so many of my journeys, and have made them so much better. So, and if people ever say like, "Oh, here's those same old people in Jim's book again," I say, "Good." Good. That's what makes these things better. And they're tapping into things that I can't personally tap into, because I was not in the comics industry in the in the early 70s,
Well,
or I
vice
wasn't
versa,
reading.
the other way around, you did that Star Trek book.
Mhm.
And I'm not a particular Star Trek fan. I mean, I watched the original series when it was on, and
Mhm.
the reruns in the '70s, but really don't much follow it. But but I decided I would write my essay from that perspective.
Yeah.
A kind of a non-fans fanish appreciation of Star Trek. So it offered me a way to look at a subject that I honestly never really thought about before.
Yeah. If I get a review that says, hey, this made me think of something along the, this route, or like Ed Cato's, talk about Tales of Suspense or, whatever, like, yeah, I never really looked at it like that before. And um we did get a review that said after the guy read the book, he had a few Kirby series to look up and look into,
Oh,
and it's like win.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I wanted. So I love that, and I hope that happens, more. And we need more reviews, folks.
Mhm.
I've been saying it online, and Oren, you said it. It's subtitled "A Fan Conversation." So,
Right.
let's hear it, good, bad, whatever. But yeah, just don't say Paul Kupperberg that sucks as a writer, because then I just
That's
won't.
just not
I
nice.
won't. I won't be able to credit that review.
it's
Yeah.
it's
Reviewer.
it's hurtful, but all right,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
fair cop.
I was going to say, is A Cup of Comics, the Paul Kupperberg story, next on the list?
Ooh.
No, I just published Panel by Panel, which was the Paul Kupperberg story. So
Yeah.
You know,
But this is
already done.
I. All right.
Yeah. Yeah. How about is the cup half full or something? Can't see you.
It
But
just
come on, the
adds-
story continues. It's
Is
still
the
Yeah.
going.
cup half-assed? Yes.
Well, guys, this book is absolutely fantastic. I know it's available on Amazon. Jim, where else can folks find it as well?
Amazon.
Go to Amazon.
It's funny. Every time you put something up on Amazon, it's always up on Barnes and Noble, .com. And I mean, I don't know. There's probably other places that you can find it, or you can get a dog-eared copy on eBay. Maybe I don't know for those people who dump their stuff on eBay. But yeah, Amazon. But
Check a Goodwill near you.
Orin, I think we got to get these two guys to Ithacon in the spring.
That's what I'm
Sell
saying.
it there.
There's no reason not to.
from your lips to Highfather's ears. Come on. I think you know some people. Come on, let's make that happen.
You got to make it happen.
Yeah, but if you want to talk about the book, leave us an Amazon review, leave us a Goodreads review. If you've got a blog, if you've got a YouTube show, just make sure that you tag me or let me know, and I'll spread it around. I'm on Facebook. I'm over at the Jim Beard and Becky Books page. The book was published by Becky Books. And stop in there, and I'd love to hear about it. I want to hear people's thoughts on this. Like I say in my introduction to the book, you can love Jack, you can hate Jack's work, but you cannot deny the influence that he had throughout the industry, for all those years. I mean, pretty much, either creating or popularizing whole genres of of comic books is just, mind blowing. And you can't deny that. You can say I don't like bricks for knees, in my anatomy, but you can't deny that the influence that he has had. And I think this book shows it, 1961 to 1978, and everything that's just jammed between those two bookends is just incredible.
And we're back. That was so cool. Those guys, they put a lot of time, a lot of effort into this book. Jim does a phenomenal job editing. If you haven't seen Jim's other books, go to Amazon, just type his name in. He has a whole litany of books down there. I have a number of them. I've enjoyed every single one. But talking to Paul, who actually worked with Jack Kirby on the superpowers, not directly, but with him on the project as well. Ed with great insight, Jim, of course, with great insight. So, guys, thank you so much for coming on to talk to us about this. Like I said, go on to Amazon, get this book, guys. If you're a Jack Kirby fan, or if not, or if you're just trying to learn more about him, this is a great way just to see the different things he worked on, people's opinions of it, people's feelings while reading his comics and seeing his art. And I think that's a great way to bring fans together in conversation. So, we have 3 episodes this week, gang. 3 episodes. This is just number 2. You got 1 more to go, and I think you're really going to like it. But I'm not going to say anything more about it. So, have a wonderful week, and we will see you on Friday.